Welcome back to the Horror Academic, and welcome back to Day in the Life editions of Horror Academic. Um, I took a couple of weeks off there for this, it's summertime. It's what you do. You take some time off. But I'll still create some of these on occasion. And more importantly, there's still full-length episodes being created monthly over on the channel. So be sure to check those out. What I'm going to talk about today is really Dr. Sleep. So the thing is with Dr. Sleep is that I'm going to have to talk about a couple of things to talk about this movie, right? So we'll start it off this way. First off, what really started this journey for me was I got the book. And I'm a huge King fan. I think most people know that. I was pretty excited when this book was announced. I pre-ordered the paperback. Life got in the way. I didn't get to read it until we had lockdown. So finally got to read the book. Was really, I really loved it. I got really into it. It's the official, if you don't know, sequel to The Shining. Now, I will say I do love the book The Shining. I read that probably a teenager on my little quest to catch up with Stephen King as I was growing up. And I was on this journey of every year I would read a King book in the fall in the hopes to watch for Halloween the movie. And The Shining was one of those films that I watched that way. And I love the book so much. And then kind of classically, as I've discussed before, uh, the movie was not what the book was, and that threw me off. And it's kind of affected my relationship with the movie for the rest of my life. And I think I've gone on note, you know, uh, like I said, most recent episode that I've done, we just finished a 2-part Dracula full-length episode series on Horror Academic, and The Shining came up in there, and I went on record as saying I don't love the film. I've been on the Brook Reading podcast, and we've talked King quite a bit, and I think particularly in the It Chapter 2 episode, we talked a lot about our relationship with King growing up, and I said how I had such a love for the book, and the movie disappointed me. It wasn't the same story. And I even just wrote an article a couple months ago for Something Ghoulish for the anniversary of the movie, talking about the reason Stephen King doesn't love the movie. And a lot of people, I think, kind of blow that off as him being kind of, big for his britches, I guess, that he wasn't crazy about what the great Stanley Kubrick made of his novel. And it's valid, though, because he changed a lot about what the book was about to make a film that was visually beautiful, which I won't argue. But I will say it's not the book. So the reason why it's important to talk about The Shining when you talk about Dr. Sleep, obviously it's a sequel, but um, King's book is the sequel to King's book. He knows you've all seen the movie, but you know what? It's his book, and he's going to talk about what happened at the end of his book, which is not the same as what happened at the end of the movie. So that was important to know. And so when I started this whole trip of, okay, I'm going to read this, which means I had to kind of reread The Shining to remember it right. So I did the audiobook, and I really enjoyed it, and it reminded me of all those moments that were kind of removed from the story in the movie. And there's so much more to not just Danny Torrance, which is kind of always what I've kind of said, well, it's really the story of Danny in the book and the story of his father in the movie, because really Kubrick didn't like the idea of all this kind of inner dialogue, so he kind of removed that element, which is really a big chunk of what The Shine is. So, but going back and listening to the audiobook, I remembered how much more happens before they even get to the hotel, learning the story of that family and kind of that kind of volatile environment that they were living in, and how it was an abusive family relationship, basically, and how Jack Torrance, not only had that outbreak where he hurt Danny, but he was kind of constantly putting Wendy in this traumatic state. And and then the book really chronicalizes how the hotel takes advantage of Jack's kind of raw mental state because of him trying to go dry. So, right, Kubrick's movie has some really amazing visuals. I appreciate that, but it doesn't tell that story. It's almost tells a story of a guy who's already crazy going in a situation where he's now put his family in jeopardy. So different story to me completely. Like I said, check out my article on Something Ghoulish about it, and you'll kind of see a little bit more comparison from King's perspective of why, the Kubrick film is not all that his story was. So, what was really interesting to me about Dr. Sleep when it came around was that I had read an interview, well, really an article written by the director, Flannery, about what it was to him to be the guy to make the sequel to The Shining, as someone who loves the book and loves the movie as two separate things, which is what you have to kind of learn to do, is lump them as two different things. Um, and he's like, okay, so I had to make the sequel that the book Dr. Sleep was. I had to be really, this had to be the source material, but at the same time, I had to realize in a movie you couldn't not, you know, deal with all the things that were different at the end, particularly of the movie versus the book, which is, the big things are, two big things is Halloran, the guy who helps out, the cook from the Overlook, who helps out Danny. In the book, he lives. In the movie, he does not. And then the other main change is that at the end of the movie, the hotel is still standing. But at the end of the book, it's not. It's been burnt down. So he knew he could make the story of the Dr. Sleep book up to a point, but then he was going to have to adjust for the audience who's going in knowing the movie to kind of deal with those things as well. So that's like a tall order. It's making two movies at the same time, essentially. So what hit me, first off, in starting to watch the movie was it's 3 hours. I didn't expect that. I thought it was gonna be a 2-hour movie. It's a 3-hour movie. And what I realized in watching it was that the first 2 hours is the book. And then that last hour is him, Flannery, the director, kind of inventing the sequel to the movie, which he does well. I'm going to give him credit for that because that's a lot of story to tell. Things that jump out at me having just read the book. There's a lot of composite characters, and this happens a lot in King adaptations. I've noticed is that there's so many rich characters in the books that you have to compact them into different, like instead of having 4 people, it becomes 2 or sometimes even just 1 to represent that group of people, which is rough on a reader because you're like, oh, well, now we just missed out on this and this and this. You can't have this interaction, blah, blah, blah. And you felt it if you read the book. Some of the big characters that are missing is when Danny gets to New Hampshire and he starts working in town. The person who kind of, yes, he meets the guy Billy who helps him out to kind of get a job and all that, but the person that is actually his boss is missing from the story, and he's the person who brings him to AA. Because really, I guess I should summarize that, if nothing else, what I'll tell you about the book Dr. Sleep and the movie Dr. Sleep is they are the story of a grown Danny Torrance dealing with the fact that no matter what he went through traumatically as a child, he ended up growing up being his father's son. And it's just, he has to, it's either he's going to die that way as being a raging alcoholic with a massive temper problem who is, constantly putting himself in danger, almost as a threat to himself, like he's constantly pushing it to the point where he's fall down blackout drunk, or he's starting fights in bars, or he's doing drugs or having sex with people he doesn't know, and putting himself in these situations where he's waking up, he doesn't know who the woman next to him is, kind of thing. And it's all this kind of alcoholic spiral that he's way in the midst of when we meet him in the book. But it's kind of his redemption story. It's him learning that this is I've hit, it's as they say in AA, and it comes up in a lot of the book, I've hit rock bottom and it's time for me to turn my life around, kind of thing. And it's his story of gaining that strength back to be his own person and to kind of let whatever he's inherited from his father go away. That's like half the story. The other half of the story is this girl who grows up with immense powers that are similar to what Danny grew up with, but far more intense. And that is Abra. And Abra is kind of like the biggest shine that there is, if you can talk about The Shining. And it's her being noticed and eventually tracked, I guess you could say, by a group of, they're not human, they're not aliens, they're beyond humans. But they are creatures that eat the shine, essentially, out of people who shine. And that's how they exist. And they're kind of vampires. And that's really fascinating. And I loved this kind of big bad setup of this. And is this really great thing is that they live kind of in the, not in the shadows like a vampire, but in broad daylight, as kind of almost, I don't want to give too much away, but they kind of get away with being these, I would say like they almost look like retirees, and they just kind of live in society in a way that nobody's going to notice. And they're really ancients who have learned to feed off the people with shine. So they're pursuing her, and Danny is kind of stuck in the middle because he feels her shine as well, and she reaches out to him. So it's this kind of whole world of people who have this power that we in the book of The Shining only know of two people who have. So it kind of opens that universe. Like, what would it be like if there were more Danny Torrances out there in the world? And that's what this story really is. So, right. So in the book, there's a lot more people that we meet along both Danny and Abra's journey. We lose in the movie Abra's grandmother. She becomes someone you hear about in the background as opposed to someone who has a big influence on her life. Her mother is almost non-existent. Father is even diminished. Almost like a collapsing of those two characters together to create the character we find in the film. So that's unfortunate. Even the True Knot, who are those who are like the shine eaters, there you gotta get the picture that there's tons of them, or there's like at least dozens of them living together in like a commune kind of situation. And we only see the ones that are named in the book. So we only see like 6 of them. So that's, the world's bigger in a book, and he has to minimize that for a film. So that's kind of disappointing as a reader. But at the same time, I'll say that what characters they do show, they get spot on. Like the Danny now, I mean, the adult Danny, I thought was done excellent by Ewan McGregor. The girls, I believe, who play Abra do an amazing job. I was really kind of worried going into a movie that relied so heavily in the story on a child actor. Like, are you gonna be able to do this? And the girl is great. She pulls it off. On top of that, some of the other characters that come into their lives, especially the True Knot characters, I thought were done great. Rosa Hat is perfect, but I mean, she's far more, I would say far more sexual in the book, in this kind of, she kind of oozes this kind of sensuality more in the book. In the movie a little, but overall, though, I think they did a great job kind of encapsulating who she was in the book and who the True Knot kind of are. So unfortunately, we don't get as much interaction with them individually. We don't get to really meet the other characters as much as we do in the book. But I thought they did a really good job representing the characters that they picked to show. I guess I'll put it that way. A huge factor also, as a reader coming into the movie, was this massively truncated timeline. Because the book, and the movie does this a little bit, where it shows young Danny kind of right after The Shining and then blasts us forward to him kind of blackout, drunk. All that happens in the book too. But the timeline from when he's an adult is all kind of truncated to maybe year 1 and then 8 years later. Where in the book we get to, like, especially with Abra's life, we really get to see Abra grow up and all the things that happen that are strange in her life. So that was a little weird also, is that they really kind of make things happen really fast. But what that helps, I will say, even though we miss a lot of moments that I loved in the book because of it, I will say that the pacing on this movie was excellent and it moved. It told a lot of story in those first 2 hours. I'll put it this way. Here's King's book, right? We're talking a 634 page book. I think it's a 35 page book. And they go through this in 2 hours. Oh, okay. They go through like this much of it in 2 hours. And in the end, of course, they've changed. But so that's impressive that they are able to get like bang, 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 all those key moments. It's like they're just banging them out and they tell a good story. Whereas I will argue that The Shining is a movie that feels long to me and the pacing is very slow and it doesn't tell half the story that is in the book. So that's a switch. And maybe that's just a more modern storytelling thing. Um, Looking at Flannery, yes, he worked on movies like Ouija, but he also worked on the Netflix show Haunting a Hill House, right? And so someone who can tell a story in an hour is the right kind of person to tell an epic tale like this if you want to bang it out quickly and if you want to put it into a kind of film time frame for such a large book. So he's a good choice, I think, in that respect. I believe he also did I didn't get to watch this yet. I really should because I love the book Gerald's Game, and I think that's why I didn't watch it yet. He did the mini series that's out there of Gerald's Game. I think that's also on Netflix. So he already has some experience adapting King, which is good. And he did a good job here. So now I am going to go back and watch that. I loved that book though, so I was really hesitant on watching the miniseries. So, I mean, I think both adaptations, both The Shining and Doctor Sleep, leave out a lot that are in the books. But I think The Shining, if you just watch the film without the book, I don't know if the story makes sense. This and watching it with my husband who didn't read the book, he said, "Oh no, that story made sense to me. That they told me a lot." But to me, I'm thinking all these key details that are missing that to me tell that story even better. Like even the fact that you don't know some of the names of the True Knot members, or you don't even hear their names till almost the end, when there's this big kind of battle, which is kind of like, wow, I already knew who he was for quite a while until now. But you know, those kind of details, knowing things that Abra did growing up, gone. But like I said, all that together, it did tell a story, and it told a story that you could follow, which I don't know if The Shining does if you didn't read the book first. It's kind of like the shorthand. But even this, I will say, did feel like kind of like the Reader's Digest version of the book Doctor Sleep, which I guess is what most movies feel like when they're adapted. So even though, yeah, we're missing these details, we're missing characters, it makes its own sense. They make their own sense of the story in the film, which is, I think, is important. I love the book. I love the details of the book, but this using that shorthand does tell that story. I will say, I mean, like everything, honestly, if it's a book that, you know, if it's a movie based on a book, I would always say read the book and then watch the movie. You can always go backwards, it's fine, but that's just me. That's how I do it. So the last hour of the film, what it does is it takes all of those key moments you remember from The Shining and it throws in references to them. It has the adult Danny Torrance have to deal with them, and it brings it into the story of this struggle of Abra and the True Knot. And it does it well, but it's a totally different ending, and it had to be because of those changes. Um, I think it was a good story. I don't know if we needed a 3-hour movie is my problem. I think we did a 2-hour summary to get to this hour. But if we weren't so concerned with making a visual sequel to the movie The Shining, we probably could have done that in a half an hour. But they wanted to get all these notes in, references to things that you would remember. So it's almost like an agreement that will let me make these things happen, and I'll need more time. So, which also maybe I'm thinking about it, and I mean, like I said, when the book came out and then the movie came out, life was going on, and I wasn't able to kind of be part of it when that happened, because of stuff in life. But I do remember thinking that the theatrical run was kind of short, and knowing now that it was a 3-hour movie, that's probably why. And I also know that it kind of got panned by people before they even saw it. And I'm thinking these 3 hours. I know there's some gatekeeping there of you don't touch The Shining. It's perfect. You can't make a movie that's a sequel to it. And I know people had that reaction. And you know what? If King got over that, you can get over that. He's like, if that's one of the most treasured books of his that he wrote, and he could like finally come back and make a sequel, then it's like everything. It's not yours. It's out in the universe. So I get that. So a lot of people didn't want to like this movie no matter what. I loved the book and I liked the movie. I will put it that way. Because they have the scenes in the hotel, uh, Danny has to deal with his father, the memory of his father, the ghost of his father, as it is. And they do that very well. I was a little shocked by the actor that they picked because I'm looking at the guy. I'm like, that guy doesn't really look. I will say this also because in the opening, they have actors who are kind of recreating the characters of Wendy and Danny and even Halloran, and none of them really look like the characters in the Shining movie. But they get the feel. They do really well at like the clothing and the hair and the voices. They get the voices down really well, but they don't particularly look like them. Um, and I could say the same for the way they showed Jack Torrance. And I couldn't unsee it once I figured out who it was. And I like literally, I'm like IMDbing, like, who the hell is that? Because that guy looks so familiar. And it's the kid who played Elliot in E.T., which is pretty cool to me. But I don't know if everybody else is going to feel that way. I think he did a good job. Overall, I didn't hate anything about it. I wanted more of those details, and I'm just gonna wrap it up by saying I got the same emotion I get almost all the time from watching an adaptation of a Stephen King, which is miniseries. Go to miniseries. It's the best way to adapt something that long and that involved and that in depth and that detailed, because it's so hard to cram everything that King writes into a movie. And I think every miniseries that's come out has been the best example of how to adapt him. So I would have loved for Dr. Sleep to be a miniseries. But, who knows? Maybe we got the Shining miniseries decades after the Shining movie. So maybe there'll be a Dr. Sleep miniseries in like 10 or 20 years. I don't know. I'd check it out. All right. So I've rambled quite a bit about Stephen King, Shining, and Dr. Sleep. What I will say, I loved the book. Let me repeat this. I loved the book. I liked the movie a lot, but I loved the book. So I'm going to say check them both out. It's up to you what order. But if you like Stephen King, if you like The Shining, the book or the movie, I think you'll get something out of both, actually. So if you're a movie only person, that's cool. If you're a book only person, I get that too. I will say this is my top recommendation going into the book, reread or listen to The Shining, because there's a lot of details that are referenced that I would not have remembered if I hadn't. And if you go to the movie, the same thing. You have to rewatch the movie. And that's why I have this nice little, I don't even have a 4K player, by the way. It's just because that's the only way I can get the Blu-ray at a good price. So rewatch this before you watch that. Reread before you read. That's how it goes. All right. So Dr. Sleep, I give it a recommendation. Check it out. And next time, I'll pick something that I won't have as much to talk about. Maybe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Horror Academic.